We have abundant evidence that pandemic planning has been going on with incredible written documentation and video documentation since, at least 2002, since the first SARS outbreak. We're witnessing the real danger of groupthink, and how easily deceived populations are. The public accepted a completely unsupported, fictitious, false narrative. How did vaccines, unlike any medicine or surgery, why do they have this special place where they're always safe and effective? Everyone should always take them without exceptions. And we believe there is an ideology that's formed years ago on vaccines. National Institutes of Health guidelines that said that specifically. Do not treat COVID-19 until people are sick enough to be in the hospital. In fact, even when they're hospitalized, still don't treat it in the hospital until they require oxygen. Well, let me tell you, I'm a doctor. When a pneumonia gets that severe and they require oxygen, we are very far behind the treatment.
Today's guest needs no introduction unless you've been living under a censorship rock for the past 4 years. Dr. Peter McCullough is a board-certified internist, cardiologist, epidemiologist, and one of the most published physicians in the world with over 1,000 peer-reviewed papers. He's a former vice chief of internal medicine at Baylor University Medical Center and served as editor for multiple major medical journals. But what makes Dr. McCullough dangerous, and I mean that in the best possible way, isn't just his credential. It's the fact that he stood up when almost every other doctor stayed silent. And he was one of the earliest voices challenging the suppression of early COVID treatments, the rush into experimental mRNA injections, and the silencing of scientific dissent. And he paid the price for all of us. He got censored, attacked, and deplatformed. And today he's still standing, still speaking, looking sharp, as you can see, and still fighting for medical freedom, scientific integrity, and human rights. We're going deep into the data, the deception, and the bigger picture behind it all. Dr. Peter McCullough, this is a huge honor for me, and welcome to the show.
It's great to be on the program. I can't believe I finally made the Freedude podcast. People at work said, listen, Dr. McCullough, you've been on Joe Rogan, set all his records, you went on Tucker Carlson TV, but you've never been on the Freedude.
Yeah, that's totally crazy, right?
Yeah.
So the stars are aligned today. And the funny thing is that for the last 3 days, I've had the worst flu I've ever experienced. But I don't do the COVID testing, or I've never done anything of that. But I wanted to start off with, your journey has been amazing before COVID. But if we're just going to zoom in for the 5 or 6 last years, which movie would you say best describes what you went through? Is this Alice in the Wonderland or The Matrix, or what movie would best describe what you've been going through?
Yeah, maybe The Matrix. The Matrix was such a breakthrough movie in so many ways. I mean, when you think about it, that people could actually live in some type of artificial computer-generated matrix, and then you remember when Neo gets a choice between the red pill and the blue pill. Remember the bullets coming and the slow motion. I think Matrix was in the 1990s. I mean, this was an incredible
1999
breakthrough movie. But what we all experienced is, for the first time, I actually think in human history, the entire world became entranced in some type of lockstep, where there were so many behaviors, population behaviors, that violated just basic common sense.
And could you give me an example?
Okay, here's one. There's an illness. There's a contagious illness. Now, for hundreds of years, we practiced quarantine. And it comes from the word, I believe it means 40 days. Quarantine. Now, quarantine, through the history of medicine, applied to people who were sick with a communicable disease like yellow fever or bubonic plague or Spanish flu. For the first time in human history, we applied quarantine to perfectly healthy people who couldn't spread anything. So if someone was healthy, if you made them stay at home and quarantine and lockdown, it wouldn't do anything because the person wouldn't have the disease. I mean, these things that just violated common sense, and yet they were practiced all over the world. Didn't matter what government, didn't matter if it's left wing or right wing. It didn't matter what the language was. So for the first time, healthy people were quarantined. I mean, historians are going to, when they finally wake up to what's happened, they're going to write incredible books on this.
And on that, what would you say we were really witnessing during COVID?
We're witnessing the real danger of groupthink, how and how easily deceived populations are. Like, for example, an illness that you can't see or feel, an illness for the vast majority of the population was a very, very mild illness, like a flu or a common cold. And yet we were convinced that it's so dangerous to go outside, we should actually stay inside and be afraid, almost as if bullets were flying outside. And here in Dallas, I'm in Dallas, Texas. I'll never forget when our county commissioners, the most powerful executive in Dallas, when he put out an executive order that said we must shelter in place. Shelter in place sounds like the tornado is coming, or that army tanks are coming down the street, and yet the response was just absolutely nonsensical. But the entire world, we're talking 7 billion people, became entranced in groupthink. You can't get 7 billion people to do anything the same way. They speak different languages. They have different currencies. They practice different religions. How could you, in the setting of a viral pandemic, essentially get the entire world to fall into lockstep? It's extraordinary.
But this question you're proposing is the $1 million question. And could you expand on that? Do you have an answer for it?
I can only quote scientists, sociologists, and others who've spent effort on this. Matthias Desmet, a Belgian psychologist, says what happened is the world fell into mass formation. He uses the term mass formation psychosis, meaning that there was enough isolation, there was enough fear that people started to develop free-floating anxiety. They started to become anxious. And so the human mind just deferred to authority. And when an authoritative body, let's say a government or a health agency, put out the next directive, they were in this mass formation. And mass formation goes beyond just individual behavior. It was group behavior. And then when people looked around, and if others weren't doing the same thing, they began to attack them. So, for instance, wearing masks. So people who weren't wearing masks became attacked. And you saw all this irrational behavior of, okay, you see these videos. So let's say some people are at a grocery store and the policy is to wear a mask. Well, if one person didn't wear a mask, you would see a video where he would be attacked. Other people would start a fracas. Well, listen, if you're worried about catching an infectious disease, the last thing you would do is go up to somebody and start fighting with them about not wearing a mask. Or how about this? Did you see those brutal protests in Australia? Do you remember that?
Yeah, that was horrible. And we couldn't see that on the news. Everybody did, nobody in Sweden knew about them. I had to see that on Telegram, in Telegram groups.
Right. So this was amazing. So here you have people out in in Sydney and the other major cities and they were protesting. And so the police tried to crack down the protesting. So here you have the police wearing masks and rubber gloves, and they're trying to tackle people without masks, and they're in physical contact with one another. Well, that's the last thing you would want to do if you're really afraid of catching an infectious disease,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You'd want to stay away from those people. So even the response was nonsensical. And what we started to realize, wait a minute, maybe this isn't about an infectious disease. This is about a new authoritarian way of thinking. That we have governments all over the world telling people now that they can't do things. They have to wear masks. They have to stay locked down. They can't go to work. They can't run their business. I mean, these are existential things. And we started to realize that what was going on was a global restriction in civil liberties. And really, and the major ones is in the United States, we have our inalienable rights, which are guaranteed to us in our Declaration of Independence, which are the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Well, you certainly couldn't do that during the pandemic.
Mm.
And then we have our constitutional rights, which says we can freely speak. And as you pointed out from the beginning, we were crushed by these censorship rocks that you mentioned.
Yeah.
And why would someone in Sweden, way up near the North Pole, why couldn't they watch a video about what was going on in Australia?
Yeah, or even like the protests that were occurring in Sweden. They were
Well,
always like formed as if this was some extremist right-wing movement. They were always like linking it to like some form of Nazis. They were always asking about like, so what do you think about the Nazis also protesting here?
well, that's interesting because the Nazis weren't known for civil liberties.
Yeah.
The Nazis weren't protesting or promoting life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The Nazis were for restriction of civil liberties. And ultimately, people lost their lives under the rule of the Nazis. So it couldn't be right-wing Nazis. It would actually be left-wing Nazis.
Yeah.
So this is quite interesting. In the United States, the right is typically for law and order, conservative spending, patriotic to the American flag. And the left is much more for freedom, civil liberties, smoking marijuana. The left was always, on the side of, during the sexual revolution, for instance, the 1960s, the big explosion in recreational drug use. That's all left-sided. Freedom of choice with respect to abortions and things like that. And so we had a flip-flopping. Suddenly the left was against civil liberties during COVID. The left was against people, either wearing masks, whether they want to, the freedom to choose wearing a mask, etc. And the right became on the side of freedom. So left and right actually flip-flopped. So it was quite interesting. So no, Nazis would line up with the people who actually were enforcing masking, lockdowns, vaccines, etc.
Yeah, it's funny how they spin that in the media. So you mentioned Matthias Desmond, and did you read his book, The Psychology of Totalitarianism? And what I got from that book was the biggest takeaway was it's easier to control somebody and manipulate somebody if they are not connected to nature. Did you have that takeaway as well?
If they're not connected to nature and they're not connected to one another, this is very important. So the last thing the authoritarians wanted is people to get together in groups. This is very important. So another person to follow is Dr. Claudia Chauffin, who's at
Claudia
York.
Chauffin.
Yeah, and she's at York University in Toronto, Ontario. And she's done a lot of original research on the sociology of what happened during the pandemic, particularly university students. If you notice throughout history, normally when there's a protest, it comes from university students. right? If they're going to protest a war, it's going to be on university campuses. If they're going to protest some new development in, religious discourse or what have you, it's going to be on college campuses. Drug use, marijuana, you go on and on. It's going to be college campuses. But when it came to COVID and lockdowns and masking restrictions, the college students were affected greatly. No protests. In general, very few protests on college campuses. And what Chaufan has discovered through her original research is that one of the first things that happened was to isolate the students, get them off of campus. They weren't in classes, they weren't in groups, they were in their apartments or discharged to home. And then they were, online on Zoom, essentially like we are now. And they didn't have that social connection. They couldn't, talk to their classmates, together as a group. And then they were fed a series of constant messages. And what Chaufan says is they were successfully indoctrinated. They were successfully indoctrinated. And so were large groups of workers. Entire companies went online. They worked from Zoom. You can operate an investment company or an engineering company or certainly lawyers. They simply became online companies. In fact, they've never returned to the office. There's so many, firms that have never reestablished an office. And so what Chaufan writes is indoctrination works. So when people are separated from other people, like Matthias Desmet says, that's part of the recipe for successful development of mass formation.
Do you believe that the pandemic was planned?
We have abundant evidence that pandemic planning has been going on with, incredible written documentation and video documentation since, at least 2002, since the first SARS outbreak. And it was memorialized in 2005 in the United States during the Bush administration. And this was by Congress and Health and Human Services. And they wrote what's called the PrEP Act. You can look it up. It's the United States PrEP Act. It says we will have pandemics. And when we do, we will be invaded by a foreign pathogen, a virus, a bacteria, a fungi, a toxin. And when this happens, there will be a sequence of events that will happen. And the government will take over. And there will be emergency countermeasures. There will be things that the government does, and they will be immune from liability. That's the reason why no one can have lawsuits over masking or locking down or losing their business. They were countermeasures. That was written into law in 2005. I mean, that's a pretty good anchor. And then there's an entire timeline for this. Probably the most extensive timeline is published in a book by Dr. Peter Breggin. The title of the book is COVID-19 and the Global Predators, We Are the Prey. And in that book, it's one of the earlier COVID books. In the back of the book, there's a timeline. It kind of starts out around 2002 with this idea that there could be biological threats and the PrEP Act. And then it goes on and it lists 36 pandemic preparedness planning events, official, government, public-private events that went on. And some of them are quite notable. In 2012, a research unit of the U.S. military called DARPA, they started a project called the ADEPT P3 program. You can find it on their website today. It says, we will develop messenger RNA vaccines to end pandemics in 60 days. That was the bold declaration in 2012. 2012. That means that was well before Trump or Operation Warp Speed, what have you. I mean, there was a government plan to use messenger RNA vaccines for pandemics in writing on a website in 2012. And then it keeps going forward. Another notable event is at Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health in 2017. The Gates Foundation and Johns Hopkins carry out a tabletop planning exercise. And they generate about an 80-page report that they post on their website. But the planning exercise is the SPARS pandemic. They said there will be a coronavirus pandemic, a coronavirus, specifically a coronavirus. And it will specifically come from, I believe, Asia. And when it hits the United States, there'll be great controversy. There'll be controversy over treatments and whether they work or not. And the plan would be to corral all the Americans into a program of mass vaccination. And in that, they even called that the president of the United States will be involved in, promotion of mass vaccination. And that was published as a proceedings in 2017, still on their website today. And then when the pandemic hit in 2020, they published 2 peer-reviewed papers and said, we were right. It's here. We made the correct call. And then I think the biggest one was in November of 2019, and is called Event 201. Now that one, people are called, again, Johns Hopkins, Bloomberg School of Public Health, Gates Foundation organizes it. Then they actually video it. People are in a round table. We have some U.S. senators. We have who became our next director of national intelligence, Avril Haines. George Gao, the director of the Chinese CDC, flies over from China to participate in Event 201, and they film it. And they said, well, for sure, there's going to be a COVID pandemic, and it's going to be a coronavirus, and it's definitely going to come out of China. It's actually going to come out of a lab, and there was plans in Event 201. That's what Avril Haines and George Gao's group was doing, is how do we cover up the lab origins of COVID-19? It was all planned out and filmed. So when people call it a plandemic or that it was a planned event, for sure. I think the amazing observation is, doctors like myself and other, public figures had no idea this was going on. I was completely blindsided. I mean, no one sent a video to me and said, here, watch this Event 201. This is November. What do you think? Do you think a coronavirus is going to hit? No one sent me the proceedings from Johns Hopkins. Yet it's all in the open. This is very important. It's all in the open. And so even when Trump comes out and he announces a public health emergency in March of 2020, and then within a few days, Stefan Bainzel at Moderna says, well, we have a vaccine for it. Within a few days, no one, told America, listen, United States and DARPA has had this plan since 2012. Well, let's take a look at their website. Everyone said, well, they're brand new vaccines. Isn't this great that Moderna came up with it? No one did even a few clicks on the internet, myself included, to discover this. So great credit to Peter Breggin, and then other books came online. A lot of them worked to villainize Anthony Fauci, which included the real Anthony Fauci, Robert F. Kennedy. Senator Rand Paul's published a book. I published a book, Courage to Face COVID-19. So we piece all this together, but without a doubt, there was incredible planning. There appeared to be, in my book, we kind of, I think, solidify the global nature of the planning. And we use a term called the biopharmaceutical complex. Biopharmaceutical. So bio means it does involve viruses, bacteria, fungi. Pharmaceutical means vaccines, therapeutics, others. And then a complex. That is a working organization. And based on everything we can see, for sure, the World Health Organization is involved. For sure. I mean, the World Health Organization was intimately involved in a fraudulent, quote, investigation of Wuhan very early in 2020. They are closely linked to the World Economic Forum, so we think they're in there. They're also very closely linked to the Gates Foundation, who was just, a named sponsor and participant in the planning event.
They became the biggest sponsor when Trump withdrew sponsorship to the WHO.
Right. So let's, and who I'm naming so far are non-governmental organizations, unelected organizations with amazing amounts of money. We think trillions of dollars are involved. This is the power of this. Rockefeller Foundation, Wellcome Trust, Gavi, the Global Vaccine Alliance, CEPI, the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness and Innovation. I mean, this consortium of, that controls trillions of dollars. All the regulatory agencies, the Swedish regulatory agency, the U.S. CDC, FDA, NIH, the British, National Health Service, the MHRA, the European Medicine Association, SAFRA in South Africa, the Therapeutic Goods Administration in Australia. So they all have tentacles. And they've been meeting in close communications, etc. And then in this complex are the suppliers. The suppliers are diagnostic companies that make PCR tests like Abbott and Roche, but also, vaccine manufacturers like Pfizer, Moderna, BioNTech, Janssen, AstraZeneca. But the suppliers are exactly that. They are financially benefiting from this, but I don't think they're driving it. I think the operations are coming from the complex. And Lisa Myron, who's an investigative journalist and attorney in Toronto, has done a great job outlining how is this pulled off. And she's focused on the communications. And she points out that the WHO had, I believe, 193 member nations. They had over 140 NFPs, or national focal points. These were offices that were essentially communication offices all over the world. Ours is in Washington, D.C., and it's called PAHO, the Pan American Health Organization. And what Myron believes is that the WHO in this complex was calling the shots because she said the same talking points came out in the media on the same day all over the world all at once. You can't get a single message in the world uniformly all at once. And here's some good examples. Early on, whether you were in Mongolia, Russia, Indonesia, Sweden, United States, South Africa, Argentina, on the same day, a talking point. And people have put together montages of people in the media with the dates where they're saying at the same time. So early on the pandemic, this one came out. You probably remember this one. No one is safe.
Yeah.
No one is safe. What a fear-injected message. That's like we're going to get hit by a nuclear missile and no one is safe. Stay inside, be fearful, wear a mask, keep your business closed. I mean, this is unbelievable. Then later on, 2021, another one came out. And this one came out everywhere. Every single government official in the United States, President of the United States, even, Republican Governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, they all said this on the same day. They said it's now a crisis of the unvaccinated. Now, how did they know? The CDC never released the vaccine administration data. We don't know who took a vaccine or not. No one was keeping track accurately. There was, nothing was farther from the truth. These messages went out all over the world, and what Lisa Myron thinks is that's how, when you have a biopharmaceutical complex, you can control global communications.
Yeah, that was one of the most disturbing messages. And I'm not a guy that looks into mainstream media. I've detoxed from media since 2007 after reading Tim Ferriss' book, The 4-Hour Workweek, because I was like, the media has their own agenda and I have my agenda for where my life is going. But of course, when you're on social media and you're trying to follow what's happening with the pandemic, because it was such a huge event, it was affecting all of us. Our prime minister in Sweden said that we are going to map out the unvaccinated. We're going to find where they are and we need to keep an eye on them. And that is when I started. I'm not going to say officially how I prepared for if that type of event would come around, but I was so prepared, like I was putting my life on the preparation. So that was like, there's so many disturbing moments from this pandemic, and you've probably seen the documentary Plandemic.
Yeah.
Yeah, Plandemic 1, 2, and there's a third one. How accurate was that documentary? Because it was so early out there.
Yeah, most of it captured clips. A lot of people put together documentaries, and I'm in them. The good thing about video, it does memorialize what we say. I quit doing interviews where someone would write down what I said because it quickly could be changed. But
Mm.
the video, and I am in thousands upon thousands of video clips since 2020. And the nice thing is, you can pull it up. What did I say? And what I've always challenged people is say, point out where I was wrong. I never came out and said that we should lock down. Never.
Mm.
I never said that, masks were going to stop COVID-19. Never.
No.
I never posted a picture of me wearing a mask on Twitter. You know how some people, they actually changed their Twitter images, their their pictures to being wearing masks to kind of show this mass formation. It's like, I'm doing this for the betterment of society. And masks were taken to this level of ridiculousness. Have you seen the pictures where there's a mask and there's a little opening and people can, eat through their mask? Or one time I was called on, national primetime TV because there was a girl, and she's outside running a track meet, 1,000-meter race, and they made all the kids wear masks. And they're outside, and the wind is blowing. And this poor girl just literally cannot get the ventilation, to run this race, and she collapses near the end. And her father's on, and she's been injured on the track. And you just realize there's images of people wearing masks in swimming pools and swimming. Driving in the car alone wearing a mask. So when we see these types of behaviors, and we can look back, and most of us can look back and say, these made no sense. And then you hear the statements. You talked about the Swedish government, in a sense, hunting the unvaccinated. I'll never forget when New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern came out and said, there will be a single source of truth. The New Zealand government. I mean, that's about as totalitarian as you get. I've traveled to China multiple times, and one time I was near the North Korea border with some Chinese cardiologists, and they had gone over to help the North Koreans learn how to do some cardiac procedures. And they said when they checked in at North Korea, they had to leave their cell phones and computers all at the border, and they checked them into a hotel in North Korea. Now, this is, about 20 years ago. And they said when they turned on the TV, there was one channel, the government channel, in their hotel room in North Korea. There was a single source of truth. I mean, that's as totalitarian as you can get. And, in the United States, believe it or not, we even had practices in the media. You talked about you don't watch mainstream media. About 25 years ago, we had a practice called the fair balance. I think it actually was somehow codified into law. It was called the Fair Balance Act, meaning that in the media, if you're going to put out a story on something, you're really obligated to show both sides of the story, the narrative and the counter narrative. And what we saw with the pandemic is there just was a narrative and no counter narrative. And when any of these stations would bring on someone else, and so in the United States, I was one of the principal people that was asked to go on national TV and give a counter narrative. So they would show, Anthony Fauci or the CDC director Redfield or Walensky. Remember, we went through a whole series of these leaders. They were in power. They all retired and left. So they've kind of been a revolving door. I haven't. I've been here the whole time. And they call me on and say, well, Dr. Fauci says that you should wear 2 masks. Dr. McCullough, what do you think? And so, I would give a counter narrative. That's what the media is supposed to be doing. But one of the things you'll notice is the pandemic, just like the PrEP Act is written, the pandemic was treated like it was a war. This is very important, like that it was wartime. And in wartime, civil liberties are suspended. Counter narratives are not given. The government tells you what they're doing in a war, and they don't show the other side in war. It's been said, all is fair in love in war.
Mm.
And we can see this today. We can see this today in the reporting of war, that it's not fair balance at all. At all. The media or the governments typically pick which side they want to be on the war. And the most common thing to do is pick the side that's the strongest and that's, militarily overwhelmingly dominant, and only show that side of it. The other side is not shown whatsoever. As a matter of fact, the other side becomes essentially kind of nameless and faceless. And so we see this today. An example would be the United States is very familiar with Israel. We're very familiar. We know Bibi Netanyahu and the Knesset, and Americans own real estate in Israel, and there's actually a very strong political action committee in Israel called APEC. They actually have an influence on writing the U.S. political platform. So it's very, very tight. So
And what do you
in the
say about
Mideast,
like that the Israelis are actually running the states?
well, I mean, in many ways, they're very influential, right? I mean, they're overrepresented in the House and the Senate, what have you. I think about 2% of the United States is Jewish, but it's 10% of our legislature. I mean, they're the only overrepresented minority. But anyhow, when I get back to war, so what's presented to us is a lot of detail where we know names and faces and victims on the Israeli side. But on the other side, there's not even mention of a name. So when we hear Hezbollah, no one knows, who is the leader of Hezbollah?
Yeah, no idea.
Who are the leaders? What do their faces look like? Or how about Hamas? Who's the leader of Hamas? What do their faces look like? So the enemies become nameless and faceless.
Faceless, yeah.
And so that makes it easier for, this is called the politics of the strong. That makes it easier for the stronger entity, like overwhelmingly strong, to essentially destroy the enemy. It's easy when the enemy doesn't have a name, doesn't have a face, doesn't have a family, doesn't have, and we've seen this time and time again. So in the setting of the pandemic, there was just one narrative, the government narrative, and they weren't going to have anywhere in the world, they weren't going to have a counter narrative. It's just like war. I guarantee in Russia, they don't give any portrayal of Ukrainians. They just don't. It's war. Right. And so there is a suspension of fair balance in war. There was a suspension of fair balance in the pandemic.
About you, so what belief did you once hold that you now completely reevaluated after everything you've gone through? I bet you've been visiting a bunch of rabbit holes that you couldn't even foresee going down into.
I think the biggest one is the Hippocratic Oath. That's the biggest one. So in medicine, our charge, and we actually take an oath when we finish, and this applies to doctors, nurses, everybody in the medical field. It's a huge part of any economy in any country. And essentially what we're charged with, our professional charge, is that we are, responsible for fighting disease, for preserving life, and above all, doing no harm. And when I saw healthcare providers, doctors, nurses, and others in large number walking away from those responsibilities, I couldn't believe it. I could not believe it.
In what way?
To allow people to suffer at home to the point where they couldn't breathe. And it was a severe illness for elderly and those with other problems. to the point where they could not breathe, offer them no treatment at all. In fact, actively suppress any treatment.
And if
And
you
then,
would put yourself in their shoes, why did they not do any form of treatment, and why did they turn their back on the Hippocratic oath? Like,
that's
what
the
was in
interview.
place there?
Well, that's the interview you want to have, right? You
Yeah,
want to have somebody from the Karolinska Institute, let's say a chief
yeah,
of medicine, and you want to ask them, why did you not treat COVID patients?
mm,
Why did you let them get so sick to be hospitalized? Because virtually every death occurred in the hospital. It
mm.
was obvious we had to treat them early at home. That's the interview you want to have. People always ask me, can you explain the motives of the people who didn't do anything? I said, it's very hard for me to do. I
Yeah,
took charge and I did it. I treated all my high-risk patients. I published the most widely used treatment protocol, in the world. I mean, I had a massive global impact. I did everything. I
mm,
did all the interviews. I was the first to testify in the U.S. Senate that we could treat COVID-19.
mm.
It's impossible for me to answer for the inaction of others. You have to ask them, and no one will have them on their shows to ask them. I mean, it's just so. And people say, "Well, Dr. McCullough, tell me what they were thinking." I said, "Ask them."
Yeah. So not exactly like what they were thinking, but what systemically like gives them the easiest route to just not heal people and just turn their back on the whole situation.
The government told me to do it. The government told me not to treat patients. The government told me that I can't use this drug. I can't use that drug. The government told me to let them get as sick as possible and in the hospital before I start treatment. And that
Mm.
was memorialized in the October 8th, 2020 National Institutes of Health guidelines that said that specifically. Do not treat COVID-19 until people are sick enough to be in the hospital. In fact, even
Wow.
when they're hospitalized, still don't treat it in the hospital until they require oxygen. Well, let me tell you, I'm a doctor. When a pneumonia gets that severe and they require oxygen, we are very far behind the treatment curve.
Mm. So we actually like just let people die.
You can't. To me, that is mind blowing. And I remember I was at a major medical center. I was a professor of medicine,
Mm.
and I remember those days when I started to ask my colleagues, "Are you going to treat this? What's going to happen?" And I think early on there was a lot of fear. It was we were told to shut down our clinics, and what can we do anyway? There's no FDA approved drugs. There's no large prospective double-blind randomized placebo-controlled trials completed. And I said, it's a pandemic. The virus doesn't come with an instruction booklet. Early on, we have to use our clinical judgment. And then the trials will catch up, then the government guidelines. I mean, I've never waited for any condition. In my practice, I've never waited for government guidelines to treat something. And there aren't government guidelines that cover every illness. There are not. There are not. You can't find them. I mean, this comes up day in and day out. So suddenly doctors felt completely handcuffed by government guidelines, the absence of clinical trials. Even when I published my seminal paper on the early treatment of COVID, it ultimately became copyrighted in the McCullough protocol.
Mm.
Using sequenced drugs in combination, reducing contagion control, risk stratification. It had everything. I mean, it was kind of, the document. It came out in August of 2020. It preceded the National Institutes of Health guidelines. When that came out, I got letters to the editor, which can happen. Usually you get two. Only about two is permitted. They permitted 6. And they came from Monash University in Australia. I believe one came from Europe, South America, Montreal. And the letter said, Dr. McCullough, you can't treat COVID. You can't do that.
Really?
You don't have enough evidence.
Hmm.
And then, of course, more evidence came in. We started seeing more and more signals of benefit. And so my responses, and this is the good thing about allowing, you know, meritorious papers to be published in the scientific literature, and it's still there today, and having the normal scientific vetting process through letters to the editor and responses. My responses, and I'd provide more data, and they were very scholarly and respectful. But in the end, I implied this: overcome your fear and join me in compassionately treating these people so they can get through the pandemic. The principle here was that if we could reduce the intensity and and duration of symptoms, that people would still get sick, but they would get through the illness. And if we avoided hospitalization and death, that was a success. People getting the illness, that became irrelevant. And so, one of the other false premises of the pandemic is you can avoid getting COVID. So wear a mask, use hand sanitizer. You can not get sick. You can avoid it. Remember contact tracing? Remember that?
Yeah, yeah.
People don't mention that anymore. Where, oh, you touched so and so, and you touched so and so, and who were you with, and how much money was spent on contact tracing? It turns out everybody got COVID. Everyone got it. So, can you imagine a government narrative early on that says, "Listen, this is really contagious. We're all gonna get it. So brace yourself. We're all gonna get it." The goal is for high-risk people to get early treatment, McCullough protocol being kind of the prototype, and then just get through the illness. And once you're through the illness, you'll have a form of natural immunity, and you may never get it again, but if you do, it'll be much milder. And can you imagine if we had that narrative? It would have been completely different. No reason to lock down, no reason to social distance. We're all going to get it. And, if someone's particularly vulnerable and they have lung disease or heart failure, or perhaps, you can stay at home, try to stay away, or, be careful. Special protections for the seniors. I was all for that. This was essentially memorialized in the Great Barrington Declaration that said this. But the premise should have been, we're all going to get it. We shouldn't have had the pretext that said you can avoid it. And contact tracing was a whole program to say, well, you can avoid it and you should stay away, and you're contagious and you're not. And it was all based on firm, fixed, false beliefs. And no one's ever revisited that. We've never seen a manuscript from the CDC saying, the uselessness of contact tracing. The governments have never told us how much money they spent on contact tracing. Contact tracing should be held up as a useless pandemic exercise, giant waste of money. How could we be so wrong? Governments are not visiting what went wrong during the pandemic, as if there's no desire to learn, and we could be in trouble the next time.
That is really disturbing, and I see that in many people, like speaking about the pandemic, that the main narrative. What would you say is still the main narrative amongst like just average folks? What have happened like during the pandemic? They don't criticize the vaccine. They don't criticize the lockdowns, the wear mask, the mask wearing. I don't see people saying anything about it.
No. I think the majority of people said, listen, it was a difficult time. No one knew what to do. Out of an abundance of caution, we locked down, we closed our businesses, we played it safe. We took the vaccines based on faith. We believed in the vaccines. We took them, and we survived. And so because we survived the pandemic and many people didn't, we must have done the right thing. That must be what they're thinking.
Mm. And what can you say about the aftermath after people getting the vaccination?
Oh, it's been catastrophic.
What has happened?
Been absolutely catastrophic. I give big public programs in the United States, thousands of people. I'm on stage. There's no censorship. I just did one last week, and this has gone on since 2021, and I've
Wow.
done it all over the world. I've been in Europe. I've been in the European Parliament and Australian Parliament, and all over Europe and Australia, Canada. So it's been a global experience. When I get in front of a big crowd and I ask people, how many in the room know someone who's been injured, disabled, or have died due to a COVID-19 vaccine? About
Yeah.
85% raise their
Yeah.
hands.
I'm raising my hand here.
85%. This is astonishing. I have never seen a biological product that is this grossly unsafe and is so long acting and causes so many side effects for such a long period of time.
And can you talk about shedding? What is shedding, and is that a real thing? So can I get the negative effects from the vaccine if I haven't taken the jab?
Well, let's take you right now. You
Mm.
have some type of virus.
Yeah, flu-like symptoms.
Maybe you have influenza A or B.
Mm.
Maybe you have the Nimbus, the Omicron NB 1.8.1 variant. You may. Maybe you have a rhinovirus or a paramyxovirus.
Mm.
It's possible. That virus is in your nose right now. It's actually in the front part of your nose. And the virus is replicating,
Mm.
amplifying. And you're breathing the virus down into your lungs. So
Mm.
it's spreading into your lungs. The lymphatic flow is going back to your throat. So that's the
Mm.
reason why you feel it in your throat. The throat itself is not infected. It may be a bit red, but
Yeah.
this virus is amplifying and amplifying. So if you were to, come over to my house, you come from Sweden all the way over to Dallas,
All right.
get right in my face and talk and breathe and cough and sneeze, you would transmit it to me. And then you would shed the virus to me, and then it would set up in my nose. And for about 5 to 7 days, I wouldn't know it because there's no symptoms at all, no runny nose. The virus would amplify, 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 and then it would spread back to my throat. The first sign I would have is a sore throat.
Mm.
And then
Yeah.
I'd say, you know what? Morgan's a good guy, but he gave me a cold. And it'd be about 5 or 7 days later. It always is. So of course shedding happens. Now when you take a vaccine and you take the vaccine in the arm and you realize the vaccine spreads to all the cells and tissues in the body, the vaccine installs the genetic code for the spike protein on the surface of the virus. Now the spike protein is an abundant protein that's there for a very long time. We have a case in preparation right now where we've used advanced laboratory testing. We have a vaccinated person who has spike protein in his blood. That means it's in his secretions and everything for 3.2 years. Okay. For
Wow.
sure, he can shed that spike protein onto others with a sneeze, or even when you exhale breath, there's little phospholipid bubbles called exosomes. And so you can shed. So people have reported, wow, someone took a vaccine and I was around them and I felt kind of sick. This has been published in the peer-reviewed literature. Unvaccinated women can have their menstrual periods disturbed by someone who's vaccinated. That's called shedding. I think the vast majority of shedding. Now, if you shed a virus onto me, I can get sick. If you shed the spike protein, I'm probably just getting an immune challenge, which is not a terrible thing, actually.
Mm.
So, but I do think shedding happens.
Yeah. And was there like an issue with fertility specifically with the shot? Can you speak about that?
Yeah, recently in Europe, Dr. Vibeke Manichi from Denmark, someone you probably should have on your show, has just
Mm.
published. It's conclusive. The vaccines have caused a plummeting in fertility. And the data come from the Czech Republic, where they report rates of successful births, like essentially for the entire population. And among the vaccinated, fertility plummeted substantially. Now there's a mammalian model study where the vaccines reduced the amount of eggs, ovarian eggs, by 60%. One paper from China, one paper from Israel. The Israeli paper is by Gatt and colleagues, published in the journal Andrology, show that the vaccines reduce sperm count and motility, the two major indicators of male fertility, by about 60%.
Wow,
And
60%.
yeah, and then it rebounds after 6 months if a booster isn't taken. The spike protein and presumably the messenger RNA is in ejaculate. It's in semen. So it's compelling here that fertility is affected. Notice how I'm citing the literature.
Yeah.
Do you know when government authorities have made their statements to the public, they never cite the literature? Never.
No,
They can't
that's
cite. They
true.
can't cite. It's simply putting forward a false narrative. And I testified in the U.S. House of Representatives about a year and a half ago, just 2 days after Anthony Fauci. Same group, same room. And I was grilled for about 3 or 4 hours, and I was ready. I was citing the literature. It's all filmed. You can watch every minute of that video. People behind me, and it's a very intense experience. And I've become kind of battle tested in houses of legislators over the world. And I asked the same panel. I said, "Listen, I've been here 3 or 4 hours. I've cited dozens and dozens of manuscripts. You can go find them. You can read them. You can, interpret the data as you will. But I'm giving you the source of the evidence that I'm using. You just, questioned Anthony Fauci just a few days ago. I said, did he cite a single source of evidence for anything he said?
What did they say?
No.
That's incredible.
The public accepted a completely unsupported, fictitious, false narrative. And there were even manuscripts that were fraudulent. There were manuscripts that ultimately were proven to be completely fraudulent. There was one published in Lancet concluding that hydroxychloroquine was unsafe. It was actually a fake data set. And it was pointed out to Lancet. They kept it up, on their website for about 2 weeks to kind of discourage people from using hydroxychloroquine worldwide. That was our mainstay drug for the first year of the pandemic, before we had a lot of experience with ivermectin. And so we saw academic fraud going on. So the journals were involved, the publishers, the governments. It was comprehensive. And when we had a valuable paper that would emerge on treatment or on vaccine safety, and it would make it through the peer review process. This is very interesting because the peer reviewed process, at any time, the journal can reject the paper. The editor, the associate editor, the reviewers, they can reject the paper. So once we have a paper that makes it through this gating, and maybe in an average journal, maybe 8% of papers get accepted, or 5% or 2%. It's a small number that get in. But once they get in, we pay a contracting fee, thousands of dollars, copyright, color figures, contracts, and then it's indexed in the National Library of Medicine. It's memorialized as part of permanent medical history. We saw for these papers that provided fair balance in the counter narrative, they would become retracted later on. And the publisher and the journal would retract it. And we'd say, listen, there's guidelines. There's the COPE guidelines, the Committee on Publication Ethics guidelines. There's criteria for retraction, including fraud and committing crimes and violating people's confidentiality. None of those were pointed out. The journal said, we're retracting it for essentially no reason. And fees would be lost, contracts would be broken. It would be National Library of Medicine. Then it would get a black mark saying retracted. I was an editor for decades of major journals. Before the pandemic, I had never retracted a paper, never, because the peer-reviewed process is a valid process. And if someone disagrees with the paper, they can publish a letter to the editor, and there's a dialogue. There's a proper way to do this. On medicine, there are never medicines or vaccines or surgeries where everybody completely agrees on them. Let's take a cholesterol drug, statins.
Mm.
So if you open any journal in medicine, there'll be papers that say statins save lives, they're essential, people should take them. And there's other papers saying, wait a minute, statins cause side effects and people have problems and maybe not everybody should take them. There's always a balance. There's always a balance. Do you know every single paper on the COVID vaccines in the New England Journal of Medicine, Lancet, JAMA, every single paper says the vaccines are safe and effective, and every single paper concludes that the benefits far outweigh the risks.
Mm.
With every other drug, there's always a balance, but not for these vaccines. Not for these vaccines. In fact, we've done research on this. I have a second book coming out. It's on Amazon now. It's called Vaccines, Mythology, Ideology, and Reality. Do you know it turns out that this imbalance, this lack of fair balance, exists for all vaccines? All vaccines. So smallpox vaccine and polio, and the same thing exists. That if a paper is published and it points out a safety problem with the vaccine, it's either not published or it'll be retracted, violating the ethics. So vaccines are in a special place right now. If you read papers on the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine, 100% of papers conclude they're safe and effective and that the benefits outweigh the risks.
Yeah, that's true.
So it's not just the COVID vaccines. There's something special about vaccines. And so what we explore in our book is, how did this happen? How did vaccines, unlike any medicine or surgery, why do they have this special place where they're always safe and effective? Everyone should always take them without exceptions. And we believe there is an ideology that's formed years ago on vaccines. That's how this whole COVID thing happened.
Mm.
And the ideology goes like this, that mankind is vulnerable to infectious diseases, that we're susceptible, we're weak. But through the brilliance of science and mankind, that man can make the human body stronger and more resilient through vaccination. But because the vaccines aren't perfect, everyone must take them. And if there's some side effects, or sadly, if some people die taking a vaccine, they should take it for the betterment of humanity. We accept these, collateral damage cases.
Mm.
That's vaccine ideology. It's been going on since Edward Jenner and the smallpox. It's in every major vaccine campaign.
Yeah. How do you challenge that ideology? And I'm gonna get your book, by the way.
Yeah, you'll
Super
love it
interesting.
because it's
Yeah.
historical. It's how people fell into this ideology. And and so part of this is the basis is fear. Well, we're fearful, we're vulnerable. We could all get smallpox. First thing, the illness is unassailable. There's no treatment for smallpox. There's no treatment for polio. So this fear. So the disease itself, it takes on this exaggerated fear. We're all going to be wiped out. And then the vaccinologist comes in and says, with a single shot in the arm, you're protected.
Yeah.
And the vaccinologists didn't say, well, maybe you're protected or maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. It's always a bold statement. That was Edward Jenner, Louis Pasteur, Salk, and Sabin. And there's always a lot of money involved, always.
Yeah.
And power. Edward Jenner was at the right hand of the King of England. Louis Pasteur in France, the Pasteur Institute. There's always money and power. So vaccinology is about an ideology, hubris, money, and power throughout the history. And boy, did we see that with the COVID vaccines. That's how this happened. And so to this day, there are, the majority of individuals in academia will not flinch on this. No, the vaccines are safe and effective. They saved millions of lives. That's the statement. Recently, I testified in the U.S. Senate, and that's what one of the senators said. Now, there's no prospective, double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled trials showing the vaccine saved any lives. There's no valid observational studies that show the vaccine saved lives. Plenty of vaccinated people died with COVID-19, but yet the firm fixed false belief is that vaccines save lives. They actually put up a big poster board. You go on the CDC website. So in a sense now, there's no denial of safety problems. Our Senate hearing on May 21st, 2025 was about myocarditis or heart damage. I'm a cardiologist. It's pretty serious. I don't want any drug or vaccine to cause heart damage. That's never good. And there wasn't any pushback. In a sense, people accept, yeah, the vaccines cause heart damage. Yeah, some people died. But what they were implying was it was worth it. It was worth it to sacrifice some lives with the needle to save millions of lives for the population benefit. That's vaccine ideology. So go to Amazon.com and pick up Vaccine, a Mythology, Ideology, and Reality. The first author is John Leake. He's a best-selling author. He's a historian. And it's written in a way you can understand it. He brings these characters alive, and you can see how it has happened. So we don't have a single fair, balanced position on any vaccine. And that's the reason why there's no risk stratification. For most vaccines, the feeling is, listen, everybody has to take it. Even this recent vaccine panel that Kennedy had constituted the United States, the ACIP, the Advisory Committee for Immunization Practices, even they said, yeah, we should continue to give adult influenza vaccines to 6-month-old babies. So there's no discrimination of who's at risk. Influenza is largely an adult, very, senior citizen centric problem. So you could worry about influenza in nursing homes, but you'd never worry about it in a healthy baby. But yet there's no discrimination. It's like, give them all the vaccine. Well, influenza vaccines in their package insert have a boxed warning. This is a very serious warning. It says it may cause Guillain-Barré syndrome. The influenza vaccine may cause paralysis, which can be permanent and in some cases fatal. It says right on the package insert.
That everyone reads, right?
And then the committee says, listen, everybody must take it. So the implication here is, listen, everybody must take it. Some people are going to get paralysis and die, and we don't care. And that we don't care part of it, that was memorialized in the 1986 U.S. Vaccine Injury Compensation Act, which said, listen, vaccines have, and in the legislation, a term, unavoidable harm. Vaccines have unavoidable harm. It's going to happen. People are going to be harmed. And because this is the fact, that the vaccine companies must be immune from any liability.
So this is a great segue to my next question. If a person would not be vaccinated as a child, not take any vaccines as an adult, how fearful would you be for that person's life?
If a child was healthy at birth?
Yeah, totally healthy. We were talking about just healthy human beings, not anybody with any form of special conditions, or just a healthy human being.
Right. A healthy human being will be healthier through life if they defer on all the vaccines.
Really?
Yeah, there's a half a dozen studies that demonstrate that. Most recently, Mawson and colleagues in the journal Science, Public Health Policy, and the Law, unvaccinated children are far healthier than vaccinated children. The vaccines activate the immune system. In some cases, things go wrong, and there's autoimmune conditions. There's allergic conditions. Allergic asthma is an immunologic problem. So is allergic dermatitis. There are neuropsychiatric disorders that are almost certainly related. They're kind of neuroimmunologic abnormalities. Well, the single greatest immunologic perturbation that happens to a small child is to get a big battery of vaccines. The CDC estimates a child receives hundreds and hundreds of antigens through these injections. In some people, something's going to go wrong. At between age 12 months and 15 months in the United States, a baby receives 16 different vaccine products in various combinations. If I prescribe you 16 drugs all at once, and I made you swallow every single one of them, I guarantee you would have a side effect. Something would happen.
Yeah, for sure.
It's impossible for the vaccines to not be causing side effects. In fact, the side effects are listed in their safety information pamphlets. So you can imagine in this era of vaccinology, we have an exploding number of cases of Guillain-Barré syndrome worldwide. More and more people are paralyzed. A leading cause is taking the vaccines, and it says in their package inserts that they cause Guillain-Barré syndrome. With the COVID vaccines, the package inserts say they cause heart damage or myocarditis. It says it right there. This is not controversial. It's in the agency package inserts all over the globe. The companies agree the vaccines cause heart damage. Well, I tell you, as a cardiologist, heart damage can lead to heart failure, and it can lead to cardiac arrest. It's just as clear as that. So because of this ideology, what the public is really getting concerned about is that this is madness. That the medical orthodoxy, government officials, public health agencies, that they've lost their minds. They know vaccines cause side effects. It's fairly disclosed in these safety, but yet they're telling us we have to take these shots. And in a lot of jurisdictions, children have to take vaccines in order to attend school.
Yeah, that's horrible.
That's where people are starting to get uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And they're starting to say, wait a minute, we have to have free choice called vaccine choice. And now there's public action groups and parents pulling their kids out of school. The data is out. A healthy child born today is healthier with taking no shots. Why would a parent knowingly want their child to take the shots unless they just wanted to have the kids go to school? So a lot of parents, bring their kids in and they close their eyes and they say, please God, I hope my child doesn't have a horrific reaction. And that's terrifying. And some parents are saying, listen, I'm a parent first. I'm unwilling to take that risk. I'm pulling my child, out of school. I'm going to do homeschool. I'll do something different. There's some people saying, listen, I'm not going into the military if I have to take shots. And so people are taking a stand.
Yeah. And it's illegal in Sweden and in Germany to homeschool your children.
Oh my God.
And also in Germany, it's illegal to send your kids to daycare or to school if they're unvaccinated. That's not the case in Sweden. You still have choice in Sweden.
I didn't know that. Well,
yeah.
in United States, we're fractured. So in Texas, for public schools, we have philosophical, medical, and religious exemptions. So you can actually say, listen, I don't want to take it on philosophical grounds. Fill out the forms and you're out. But in California, for instance, and these are the same diseases, diphtheria is the same, pertussis is the same. In California, there's effectively no exemptions. And so California sounds like it's a lot like Sweden or Germany. Now, that's for public institutions. Now, in Texas, the private institutions can still mandate vaccines, and the state can't do anything about it. So in the year 2000, one medical association in the United States, the Association of American Physicians and Surgeons, of which I'm a member of, published a decree platform that's a resolution that said, listen, no vaccine is effective enough or safe enough to ever make a school requirement or be a requirement for the military. They're not. The measles vaccine cannot be given to every child. I mean, in the package insert, there's contraindications. So for sure, not every child can take a vaccine. And on top of that, no vaccine works completely And almost every vaccine does not stop transmission of the virus. It does not. This is very important. So the only reason to ever have it as a school requirement is so that kids couldn't spread it to each other. They actually don't stop transmission. So on the package insert for the polio vaccine, it says right on it, this doesn't stop someone from transmitting polio to another person.
Wow. So I must just give voice to what I hear as a counter argument all the time. And that is, so what about the protection of your children? Your child might die. This is what I actually heard from a doctor when we said, like, we don't want the vaccines for our children. So that was like their direct, it was like a fear tactic. So
Well,
what if your kids die? Why
well,
don't you protect your children? And what about the measles and the chicken pox and whatnot?
right. So let's talk about that. Let's take diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis, one of the first ones. So it rolls out in 1946. So in 1946, before we had antibiotics to treat these illnesses, before we had, corticosteroids that we administered, nebulizer machines, pediatric ICUs, and all the modern care, in 1946 in the United States, there were about 3,000 deaths from diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis for the entire country. Okay, in 1946, with essentially no care. So I can tell you right now, in the United States, now our population has grown. Let's say we had no diphtheria, tetanus, or pertussis vaccination program at all. And let's say we now would be faced with 5,000 serious cases of diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis for the entire country. Well, what we would do is we would treat it. Diphtheria and pertussis is treated with azithromycin. We would just treat the illnesses. And treating the illness would handle these cases, and it would be far safer than giving the entire country diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis. What's reduced the incidence of these diseases is not the vaccines, but improved sanitation, hygiene, better food, air, and water quality. So a good example is Sweden. Sweden is a very good example. So you have the diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis. So pertussis vaccine, the original cellular pertussis vaccine, that was causing neurologic side effects for sure. It's causing seizures, encephalitis. It was bad news. So when that pertussis vaccine was taken off the market, it was replaced with the acellular pertussis vaccine. Well, Sweden had a big gap where there was no pertussis vaccinations at all in Sweden. Big gap. And guess what? There was no resurgence in pertussis. None. Because sanitation is improved, what have you. So the diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis vaccination is completely disposable. So if we didn't have it, there wouldn't be mass death. There would not. There would not. Now, I lived in the era before there was the mumps vaccine. I got mumps, my brother got mumps, and rarely there can be mumps, encephalitis, or orchitis. Nowadays, we would treat it with corticosteroids, hospitalization, probably some off-label antivirals, but it's a treatable condition. We have measles. Let's take measles. Now, measles, anybody born before 1957 is assumed to have measles because it was that common. But guess what? The WHO, and I have a Substack on this on Focal Points that just came out yesterday. And make sure everybody subscribes to Focal Points Substack. You get a free email every day. You'll get all the data that I'm citing. Do you have any idea how many cases of measles there are worldwide in the modern day?
No idea.
Now, in the United States, they were making a big deal that there were 1,200 measles cases in the United States. United States, we're 97% vaccinated against measles. But we had 1,200 cases. Okay, big deal. They were saying it's Robert F. Kennedy's fault and whatever.
Yeah.
And then they kind of dropped it. And the media dropping the story is what made me investigate. Do you know there's about 600,000 cases of measles per year in the United States?
No way.
Yeah, massive number. And just despite all Gavi and Unitate and Gates Foundation and all the measles vaccination, whatever, 600,000 cases. There's about 125,000 cases in Europe alone. So if there's 125,000 cases in Europe, and in a report from Europe, they said there was 34 deaths, but none of them were actually adjudicated due to measles. In the 600,000 case report, there's no mention of death at all by the WHO. So how can we conjure up this idea that we're going to die of measles? Measles is very treatable. We can use immunoglobulins. We have vitamin A protocols proven in randomized trials. Corticosteroids, very effective for the measles pneumonitis. And then, of course, we have secondary antibiotics. So with modern medicine, with sanitation and cleanliness, we'll have much lower incidence of disease anyway. None of these diseases are going to come back. And if there are sporadic cases, they're treatable. Yeah, we're pretty much down to the dreaded disease of polio. Polio is interesting. Do you know, before the era of kind of modern wealth in the world, there were no polio outbreaks. So you can't find a polio outbreak from 1500 or 1600. Didn't exist. Somehow there were polio outbreaks when people started living in houses and having running water and toilets, and there were cases described of polio. And in a famous University of Michigan study, of kids who had various forms of paralysis in adults, when they finally had diagnostic testing for polio, only 25% of putative cases were proven to have polio. So there was a great over-exaggeration of polio because all forms of paralysis were labeled polio. So first off, it was grossly exaggerated. But in 1952, the year the polio vaccine was just about ready to be rolled out, that was the worst polio outbreak in the United States. Do you know how many polio deaths there were in this outbreak? There was about 3,000. 3,000. Not 300,000, not 3 million, about 3,000. And the polio vaccine rolled out, water quality improved. We now have polio surveillance systems in the water because you largely get it through the water. And we haven't had polio in the Western Hemisphere in decades. It's kind of gone. So, I took the polio vaccine. I took all the vaccines as a kid. I'm sure I've never come in contact with polio. There's no evidence that I could come in contact with it. So if I don't come in contact with polio, the vaccine could not help me. It's just theoretical. I mean, I've never come in contact with Ebola. I'm pretty sure I haven't. So it wouldn't matter if I took a vaccine for Ebola. I haven't come in contact with it. So the important point here is when we talk about safety of vaccine, it's real. So if someone is paralyzed from a flu shot, that is clear cut. They develop heart damage from a COVID shot, that's clear. So safety events are real. Vaccine benefits are theoretical. They're always theoretical.
Wow. Yeah.
Because you may not ever come in contact with the organism. And even if you do, you may not know it, or you get a mild case, or you're easily treated for it. So let's go back to diphtheria and pertussis. I never test for this in my practice. Never. Someone comes in with a sore throat, lots of congestion and fever, and I examine them. I just treat them. I don't test them for pertussis. So there's no pertussis because no one's testing for it. Do you see what I mean? So the value, the societal value of vaccines has been grossly overestimated. And in today's Substack, and you can point people to it, focal points. I bring up a 2024 CDC report, and they use mathematical modeling, not real data, but a mathematical modeling. And the CDC proclaims that since 1994 in the United States, vaccines have saved 1.1 million lives. 1.1 million lives. That's what the CDC proclaims.
All right.
Well, listen, if only 3,000 kids died of diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis, and if only 3,000 kids per year at the most ever died of polio, there's no way you can get to 1 million lives saved. It's impossible. It's impossible. It's a gross over-exaggeration. Even in the modern day in the United States, we do have 20,000 childhood deaths, but the biggest threat has always been motor vehicle accidents, trauma, things of this nature, not infectious diseases. So there's been a gross exaggeration of the threat of infectious diseases, and then a gross over-attribution of theoretical benefit from vaccines. And so this whole mantra of vaccines save lives, there's no evidence that vaccines have ever saved lives.
And do we have any numbers on the flip side? How many lives have vaccines killed? And if can we go to the COVID vaccine? Mm-hmm. How many lives have the COVID vaccine shattered?
Yeah, there we do have data. And again, remember the harm is real, so we can rely on the UK yellow card system, but there's about 39 different data systems out there, and they're all concordant. In the United States, we rely on the VAERS system, Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, a very important system, and I report to it. And the VAERS implies causality by proxy of reporting, meaning if I have a death in my practice and I don't suspect a vaccine is involved, I would never report it to VAERS. There's no reason for me to ever report it. But if I believe a vaccine caused the death, that's when I'm going to take the time, effort, and actually professional risk to report it to VAERS. Do you see what I mean? So everything in VAERS, the person doing the report, the doctor doing the report, believes the vaccine caused the problem. Otherwise, we wouldn't report. Well, what do we know there? And the system's been around since 1990. So all the vaccines combined every year from 1990 forward, it amounts to about 150 deaths per year. That's what it is.
150.
150. Influenza, diphtheria, pertussis, MMR, polio. It's 150 per year until we hit COVID, until we hit 2021. And then it skyrockets into the thousands with COVID-19 vaccines. It's the biggest epidemiologic signal of all time. And so where we are in the United States is VAERS is reporting about 19,400 U.S. COVID vaccine deaths. 19,400. And there's been hundreds of peer-reviewed manuscripts that have evaluated VAERS, where they read the vignette and the proximity of how the vaccines are administered. And the conclusion is the vaccines have caused these deaths. And the U.S. government agencies have made no mention of it. State public health agencies, schools, the military, universities, they've made no mention of this. This is astronomical. And in the FDA proceedings, there's an estimate of the underreporting factor. I mean, many people die. There's no doctor involved. They could have died at home and gone to the medical examiner or just gone to the funeral home. There's no doctor involved. So no one would have ever reported it to VAERS. So the acknowledged underreporting factor for COVID deaths is about 30, conservatively. That means 30 times 19,400. We're over 560,000 Americans have died from COVID-19 vaccination. That's approaching Civil War casualties. That's more than all of World War II, Vietnam War, Korean War combined. I mean, this is astonishing. We've witnessed this in the last 5 years. And the vaccines are still going strong. And people are still dying. Even in 2025, there's been about 300 vaccine deaths. Probably at least 200 of them are COVID vaccine deaths.
Mm.
We've got Trump and Robert F. Kennedy and Marty McAfee. We've got a whole new team of administrators. They have raised no alarms, no investigation of the deaths, no mention of them. It's astonishing.
Mm. And Dr. McCullough, so have you also seen the SPARS pandemic 2025-2028 scenario from Johns Hopkins? It's a so-called fictional pandemic script written years before COVID, complete with social media censorship, rushed vaccines, public pushback, and government propaganda campaigns. So to many of us, it doesn't feel like a prediction. It reads like a playbook, like they were rehearsing.
Well, earlier in the interview, I did cite the SPARS pandemic and the Johns Hopkins
Yeah.
Bloomberg School of Public Health. They published proceedings in 2017. It's
Mm.
exactly like a playbook, and Event 201 is precise, and it even involves the Chinese. Event 201, they flew over the Chinese. They said it's coming out of China. So some believe Event 201 is so on point and so descriptive that in fact the virus was probably out of the lab by November of 2019, and Event 201 was simply planning for what's going to happen when the virus really starts to take its hold in populations. So I guess the disappointing part of this is the general unawareness of certainly myself, you, other journalists. No one was reporting on this in 2017. Or even in 2019. But now the world is different. So when people do tabletop exercises or do publish things, we pay attention. So last year, the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness and Innovation, CEPI, which was formed by the Gates Foundation and the World Economic Forum and some other countries, they published an entire monograph on Disease X. Disease X will be the next pandemic. They're already calling it. It's going to happen. Now, remember, worldwide pandemics are about once every 100 years. The last one was Spanish flu. Now, CEPI is predicting there's going to be one after another. They're going to come in like hurricanes or monsoons, one after another. And all experts believe now, just like with SARS-CoV-2, the Disease X pandemics, they come out of biolabs. They come out of biosecurity labs where the virus escapes.
And are they more dangerous because they're coming out from a lab than they are like naturally occurring? So we should be a little bit cautious, or like, I don't want to say that we should be fearful, but that is something that scares the hell out of me, that there might be some lab leak, because I've never experienced the flu as hard as I've done this time. And like this last winter, I was like, for fuck's sake, what is going on? Like, I've never experienced it that hard. Even if I have like 3 small kids, I don't sleep as good, and my natural health is not as strong as it used to be. But that is something that scares me a little bit.
Well, you really have moved us into an important topic. So yes, it's different than other viral infections, and I've had it 3 times, well documented myself. And I've never had a viral infection like this. And I've never had a viral infection that made me feel bad for so long, so-called long COVID syndrome. What we realize is this man-made virus, particularly the spike protein, the spine on the surface of the virus, that it installs a protein in our body called the spike protein. So what's happened is you've had COVID, and the virus has installed itself in your body. The virus could be slowly replicating. There are data suggesting in serious cases the virus can be in your body replicating for 9 months. You're carrying this thing around for 9 months. The spike protein can be in your body for years, Right. And so there are some other working examples of infectious diseases that, in a sense, install themselves in the human body and leave behind residual proteins. One is Lyme disease. So Borrelia burgdorferi the tick can inject the bug in the body, and you can have parts of this in the body that last for years. That's the reason why people are sick. Another example is syphilis. So syphilis installs itself in the body. It goes everywhere. It can go into the blood vessels in the brain, stay there for decades, for decades. So SARS-CoV-2 is like that. And so what we've learned is this spike protein has to be eliminated from the body to get back to health. And, besides the early treatment protocol I published in the American Journal of Medicine, my other major contribution has been the very first detoxification protocol to rid the body of spike protein. It's called McCullough Protocol, Base Spike Protein Detoxification. It's actually copyrighted in Europe. So I'm accountable for this idea.
Where can we find this protocol?
It's all over the internet. If you type it in Google, there's 5.6 million hits on it.
Okay, so we will find it. So Google hasn't censored it yet.
No, it's
maybe
all over. I published it in the Journal of the American Association of Physicians, also the Springer Nature Curious Journal of Biomedical Sciences. It's on my website, petermcculloughmd.com. You type in Amazon, type in spike detoxification. You bring up bazillions of combinations. So I knew that I hit the right thing. And it's the combined use of 3 over-the-counter products, nattokinase, bromelain, and curcumin. Very important. You should be on it. Your family members should be on it. And it works slowly. It takes about a year to dissolve this spike protein, get it out of the body. It helps prevent COVID. And it's the only way to restore to health, to restore your immunity, to feel good. I had COVID 3 times. I got to the point my ears were ringing. I was getting sick over and over again, couldn't run anymore. And I went on the detox program. I measured my antibodies against the spike protein as a proxy. They were sky high. And I was on the detox program for about 9 months. My antibodies now are significantly reduced. I'm back to running. I haven't been sick in a year. It makes a huge difference. We have peer-reviewed, published data and scientific support on this, and I have thousands of patients under direct observation. So in the United States, it's so powerful, we actually formed a company called the Wellness Company, and their product combines all 3. It's called the Ultimate Spike Detox. So if you go to twc.health, look up Ultimate Spike Detox. That is the McCullough protocol with medicinal grade, high quality combination of nattokinase, bromelain, and curcumin, natural products with some additional minor ingredients. And that's the lead product worldwide.
Amazing.
Worldwide. Yeah, I'm sure in Sweden you can go to the Wellness Company, order Ultimate Spike Detox, get your bottles shipped to you, and get going. At the bare minimum, take 2 capsules twice a day on an empty stomach. If well tolerated, your doctor approves, you can advance to 4 capsules twice a day. Now, I typically measure an antibody against the spike protein before you start. So I have a proxy for how much spike exposure you've had. The best assay for this is called the Roche Alexis assay, Roche out of Germany. And normal is less than 0.8 units per ml. Virtually no one's normal because we've all had some COVID. But a good number is less than 1,000 units per ml. That would be a couple of cases of mild COVID. But if you've taken the vaccine or you've been sick like you have or like I have, you're going to be over 1,000. And we see patients 5,000, 10,000, 25,000 on this scale. Usually start to see blood clots and heart damage over 5,000. So I strongly advise that you get an antibody against the spike protein test. It's widely available. Get the Ultimate Spike Detection Wellness Company. That's the only peer-reviewed, widely accepted approach right now. The governments have no answer. The Swedish government has not come out with a spike detoxification protocol. Karolinska has done no research on the spike protein, none. And they're a wonderful institution, but they've done nothing in the pandemic. They've done nothing to help treat patients early and prevent hospitalization and death, and they've done nothing to help long COVID or vaccine injuries. This is astonishing that a lead organization like the Karolinska Institute, the Nobel Prize for crying out loud, and with all that brain power, they can't do a single valuable thing in the pandemic. And the same is true for Harvard and from, Emory and Yale. I went on Tucker Carlson. I said, Tucker, just so you know, there's no Harvard protocol. They don't know what to do. He goes, you got to be kidding me. I said, yeah, the institutions that have the most brain power have fallen flat. They have no new ideas on how to treat the illness or prevent it, and they have no ideas of how to handle long COVID or vaccine injury syndromes.
Yeah, that says something about the institutions. That's another rabbit hole. We don't have the time to go to go there. So I wanted to ask you this. So what could you say if you could say one thing to the younger generation about health and freedom, what would it be?
For the younger generation, I advise do your own research. Never accept a consensus narrative. Don't accept it. It's just suspect right now. I wouldn't accept a consensus narrative on anything. If there's a military conflict, I wouldn't accept the fact that, well, this side is right and this side's wrong. Listen to both sides. Consider both sides of a narrative. Remember that good health is largely natural. Vaccines don't make good health. Prescription drugs largely don't make good health. They should be treating problems. If there's a problem, treat it. I prescribe drugs. That's what I do. That's fine. Good health comes from good nutrition, fitness, exercise, weight maintenance. Don't do things that are potentially unwise, like having blue or green ink injected in your skin. It's
Y-
potentially unwise.
You're
That
talking
ink
about
is,
tattoos?
yeah, the ink is not supposed to
Yeah,
be there. I can tell you right
yeah,
now, I'm a doctor. It's not supposed to be there.
yeah,
Don't put rings through your nose and what have you. Your nose is there for a reason to protect against bacteria. Don't put things in your tongue. Your tongue is
yeah. No
intact
piercings.
for a reason, right? No
Yeah,
tattoos, no piercing, no smoking, no vaping. Just be natural. Be natural the way the body was born. The body wasn't born with tattoos or nose rings. Don't ask for trouble.
yeah,
And then, be very careful on what's going on. A healthy baby born today is healthier with no vaccines. So, there's religious sects in the United States, the Mennonites, the Amish. They don't take any vaccines. They're
yeah,
perfectly fine. They live. So I think my advice to a young person today is go natural. Do not be indoctrinated. Do not fall for this. That's the best pathway for good health. Right now, a young person today has to understand there is no fair balance that's portrayed in social media or mainstream media. There's no fair balance, none. People pick sides, and then they try to make an argument. There is, and so it's up to us to weigh fair balance. I think people ought to really gravitate to independent media like the Freedude podcast. We're talking
yeah,
about things and we're providing some fair balance. Bring on somebody else on your show who thinks vaccines, are existential to life, and get some fair balance. But why does Joe Rogan have the biggest audience of podcasters? Joe Rogan has a bigger audience than mainstream media
yeah.
in the
Then
United States.
CNN and all
Yeah,
the major
yeah, and
US network combined, I think.
right. Yeah, why? Why does Joe Rogan do that?
Um,
Is like
because
you.
it's just honest, unscripted conversations.
That's it.
We're just curious. We just want to have a conversation. We just want to talk.
That's it. And
Yeah.
and Joe, to his credit, and I know virtually all the major media people now. He's very intelligent. He takes his time. He's like you. He never interrupts. He listens to learn. He's very well prepared, and he brings in both sides. So, Joe Rogan has had me on. I think I'm still the record holder for the most views on his show. But he's also had on Peter Hotez from Houston, who's a vaccine promoter. Is an absolute zealot. Peter Hotez had grants with the Chinese Fudan University in 2015, 2016 to make COVID vaccines. So Peter Hotez, who was on CNN, he knew COVID was coming because he was making COVID vaccines back in 2015, 2016. I mean, it's so clear. He's had on Donald Trump. He recently had on Bernie Sanders, right? I mean, that's the reason why Joe Rogan is so popular. Bernie Sanders clearly outlined what's happening to the Palestinians in Gaza. Fox News would never allow that. They will only show the Israeli side of the issue. Only. Only. And the same is true with, most of the mainstream media. Joe brings on people of both sides. Well, let's hear this side. Let's hear this side. People want fair balance. It's fair balance conversation that gets attention. And the mainstream media, what they're missing out on is this check on fair balance right now. Maybe it's controlled by their advertisers or financial things. Listen, I'm on mainstream media. I've been on ABC. I'm a frequent contributor on Fox. I go on all the platforms. My phone is always ringing to go on national news. I've probably been on primetime national news more than Anthony Fauci and more than, a lot of public figures. But I'm a big believer in independent media and in what you're doing. People should subscribe to your podcast, listen carefully. You go on a long drive, you can listen to this conversation. I've cited all the data. You've, asked intelligent, penetrating questions. Get Focal Points Substack, which is great. Substack is a wonderful place to get independent sources of information. And I watch CNN, I watch Fox, I watch the different media stations, but I understand that CNN is 100% on the left and Fox is 100% on the right. And it's too bad that I can't think of a single station or where there's fair balance. It's called identity politics. People feel now in the media they have established identity. And I haven't sensed that from you. I don't sense that you're on the right or on the left. I can tell you I'm not. I have voted on the right. I voted on the left. I'm completely independent. I don't have any agenda on either side.
Yeah. It feels like you're more like curious and interested about truth, and you can see like the actual effect that it has on people. So what, like, you're more have a pragmatic stance. So it's not so tied into identity, which is a dangerous way, but it's also a super powerful tool to use. Like in propaganda and in media is and also in marketing, because I've been in marketing for over 10 years. So I know the power of using identity to get someone to take action in the direction that I want.
That's
So,
it. It's the tribal nature
yes.
that people are capitalizing on. So it's the tension here is the tribal nature, the sociological tribal nature, standing up to or facing what I'm doing, and that's speaking truth to power. So what is more powerful? And what I've found is that when I walk into a room, let's say I'm in a U.S. Senate chamber, everybody wants to talk to me. They don't want to talk to somebody over here who's in a tribe. They gravitate to me. That's what I found out. That's what Joe Rogan found out. That's what Tucker Carlson found out. Some people, my interview changed the course of their career. That happened to Tucker Carlson. Within a few days, he couldn't believe what was going on with the vaccines, and he started, really investigating this. Ultimately, he lost his job on Fox. He became completely independent. So remember, independent people are the ones that have the power. So recently, in the United States, President Trump had to wrestle with this decision to drop bombs on a nuclear facility in Iran. And you could tell that the president was wrestling with this decision. And everybody in the right media, bomb them, bomb them, bomb them, there this tribal nature. But it was like Tucker Carlson, who's completely independent, who's a big President Trump supporter and friend, said, wait a minute, I'm not sure this is the right thing. Another one, very right wing and very much a Trump supporter, in fact, was in the White House in the first term, Steve Bannon. The same thing. Wait a minute, I'm not sure this is the right thing. So the fair balance, and in that example, the fair balance came from independent sources. It's very important. And that a decision was arrived at, and now we'll see what the conclusions are. I understand decisions will happen on one side of an issue or another, but I do want to see deliberation. I want to see careful thought, and it's only with that can we ever move forward. Otherwise, we are teetering on this edge of totalitarianism. It really is, and we certainly are on vaccines. And the problem with the vaccine is it's personal. So once it's injected in your body, you can't take it out. That's the problem. When it comes to a military operation, in the end, I can say, oh, well, I'm a citizen. I can only watch what's happened with this military operation. But for a vaccine, it's personal. I say, wait a minute, that's my body.
Yeah.
Now I'm stuck with paralysis, or I'm stuck with heart damage or a blood clot. That's very different. So I think vaccines, you're going to see, before the pandemic, the word vaccine didn't come up in my vocabulary very often. Never talked about it. Never talked about it. Now it's every day we're talking about vaccines, morning, noon, and night. That should tell you something.
Yeah.
And I didn't take the COVID vaccine. Did not take it. I've taken all the other vaccines up to COVID. So again, I'm fair balance. I've been on both sides of this. I can tell you going forward, I'm very unlikely to take another vaccine. If I was a young parent today, and I think that was the genesis of your question, and I had a healthy child born today, I would go natural, no vaccines.
Yeah. So thank you so much for that, because I have so many friends having small kids, even like we have a big family. I have many brothers, and they have kids, and I have a few friends that haven't vaccinated their kids, including us, and I can clearly see how much more healthy they are, and if they get sick, how much quicker they recover. That's also really interesting to see. So that is just my own observation, but I did the research before. Like I started doing research 20 years ago. Imagine that I'm 40. I can't even believe that I'm this old. But just like 20 years ago, I started like hearing about this because I studied natural medicine here in Stockholm, because I had that interest, and I was curing my own diseases and my own illnesses that I had for such a long time. And so it's really interesting to always be as an adventurer, to keep expanding my knowledge base and having these conversations with you, Peter, and just broaden my ideas of what is true. And I want to have like this last question for you, because my beliefs about what is real and what is reality and what like has been so challenged like over my life. So I feel like more of a humbleness and an openness to, I can accept so many other views today than I could when I was younger. So how has this, like these last years, challenged you when it comes to your own belief system?
Well, I guess I was listening to that and trying to harmonize. I've developed a great respect for anyone who has suffered a consequence for taking a stand. Because if someone takes a stand and they really believe that they hold the truth, or they understand the right direction, particularly when it has to do with human life and the loss of human life. I mean, that's the ultimate thing to take a stand on, right? And that individual has suffered the consequences of that. I've developed a deep respect for taking a stand and why people take a stand. And this is true in terms of military conflict. It's true in the pandemic. I mean, I took a stand to save as many lives as I could and spare people from dying from SARS-CoV-2 infection. And I've taken a stand to save as many people as I can from dying of the vaccine. And I've suffered, as you pointed out, the professional consequences. And it's not just, losing a Twitter account. I mean, I've been professionally severely damaged. And, I remember when I went on Tucker Carlson early on, he afterwards, he wanted to grab me and, all the after shoot discussion.
Yeah.
And Tucker goes, was it worth it?
Yeah.
Was it worth it? I said, if I helped a single person, it was worth it. I'll lose 100 jobs. I will be censored. I'll be defamed. I'll be destroyed if I could help one person help. People have ascribed the McCullough protocols now to saving millions of lives
Yeah.
and sparing hundreds of millions of hospitalizations. It's the greatest capstone of any doctor's career.
Mm.
And, I was in the right place at the right time. Harvard missed their chance. Karolinska missed their chance. They continue to miss opportunities. And I continue to essentially lead the world during this time of great controversy in the areas of pandemic response.
Mm. That's beautiful, and I appreciate that so much. And there's one thing that Tucker Carlson didn't ask about. That was also, did you keep your self-respect? People don't mention this because the self-respect was totally destroyed when people were start putting their own mask on. They were questioning things, but they just played along and didn't take a stance for what they believed in. So I'm super grateful. It's been an honor to speak with you here today, and thank you for taking the stance. And I will put everything in the show notes. And where can people find you if they want to connect with you, read you, find you on Focal Point, on Substack? So where should people go? What's the
Right.
best place?
So let's run the list. So I'm on all the social media platforms. Find me on Twitter, P_McCullough MD. I've got one of the biggest Twitter accounts for doctors. And then on Substack, Focal Point's very important. Go to Focal Points, get the email every day, all the critical video and print content. We have several authors. Go to McCullough Report, America Out Loud Talk News, McCullough Report every Saturday and Sunday Eastern, 2 p.m. Eastern, Pulse Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern. So I'm on that independent media platform. Pick up my books, Courage to Face COVID-19, and now Vaccines, Mythology, Ideology, and Reality, which is both on Amazon. They're 5-star rated, rapid reading books that are just very well written. Most of the COVID books are not very good because they're not written by professionals. Ours, John Leake, is probably the world's greatest historian right now. Make sure that you visit McCullough Foundation, McCulloughFND.org. That's what supports me in the media. It supports me today. All my efforts, I'll go from here to the McCullough Foundation offices. I've got more media today, as I do every day. McCulloughFND.org in the United States is a tax deductible donations, very important. Go to the Wellness Company, twc.health. I'm the scientific officer of Wellness Company. Get Ultimates by Detox. Start your journey to better health. And then for sure, constantly amplify the Freedude podcast, amplify McCullough Report, Substack. Get on YouTube. Follow me on YouTube. Amplify my videos. YouTube, the censorship is gone now. Independent media and independent thought can be very strong. Remember, it's truth to power versus tribal groupthink. Let's see who wins.
Let's see who wins. Well said, Doctor. So thank you so much for being here, and I hope to talk with you in the future. And hopefully, we're not going to face another pandemic as the Johns Hopkins Institute is planning or predicting or having the playbook for. So let's stick together and stay independent. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.